Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeff Sears, partner at Wareham Development. Wareham has been active in the life science development business in the Bay Area for over 40 years, and we're a very strong supporter of the work of the Bay Area Council. It is my honor to introduce our next speaker, Leon Panetta. Leon is the head of a small family-owned walnut farm turned vineyard in Monterey, California. But honestly, all of you know he's more than that, way more than that. He's our modern day Cincinnatus. And for those of you rusty on your Roman history, Cincinnatus was the military general and statesman famous for his selfless devotion to the Republic in times of crisis. He helped save the Republic and then gave up the reins of power when the crisis was over. He is former head of the CIA, former Secretary of Defense, former White House Chief of Staff, and a former powerful congressman. He has been both a Republican and a Democrat. Now he is a humble California farmer. Leon is funny, kind, whip-smart, and generous with his time and talents. He remains deeply engaged in political and business life. When he's not farming, he and his wife Sylvia lead the Panetta Institute for Public Policy, which is educating new generations of public servants and leaders who we need an awful lot right now. Secretary Panetta also serves on the boards of Oracle, Blue Shield, and the New York Stock Exchange, as well as many other organizations, including a number that deal with California issues specifically. He is concerned about the future of California, and from his position as a board member of Oracle, he saw close up the kind of things that can drive a longtime California company to move its headquarters out of the Bay Area in California. Who then better to talk about the state we are in and what the future may hold? The Bay Area Council is proud you call California home, and we look forward to your insights. And to lead the conversation with Leon, I'm pleased also to introduce Mike Covarrubias, Chairman and CEO of TMG Partners and former chair of the Bay Area Council. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, good morning, everyone. I am more than excited to have this conversation with Secretary Panetta. I told him yesterday in our little prep that I said, if you hadn't remembered last year, I had the opportunity to do a moderation between James Carville and Laura Ingraham. And for those of you who remember the fireworks, it ended in a conversation about gun control when James reached behind his Barcalounger, I believe, and pulled out a handgun bigger than the screen. And he didn't know we were going to talk about gun control. So it was there and it wasn't a plan. And I told him we're going to try not to go off the rails quite as far this year, but we'll have a good conversation. So welcome, Secretary Panetta. Thank you for doing this. So let's try to frame the conversation today. And as Jeff alluded and said, Leon's background and performance and contributions to our country cover a wide swath, more than almost anyone will ever talk to. So his perspectives on all of these subjects are truly unique, and that's a real meaning of the word unique. So let's start with the world at large. We'll talk then a little bit about the United States. We'll come back down to California, and then, to be honest, we're going to end up with my favorite part, which will be a conversation about the institute that he has formed and see where we can take that. So let's start with the world and the basics. We've just transitioned from a presidency that was a United States first motto, somewhat isolationist, somewhat us against them, to now trying to revert back to a globalist perspective, albeit in a world where we have some of the same characters to deal with, from Russia to China, et cetera. So what do you see today in that transition and opportunities? And what do you think are the concerns that are still the same and that we need to be aware of?
Well, thank you, Michael. And let me also express my thanks to the Bay Area Council for putting together the specific summit, but also for all you do in terms of your dedication to the community and to the Bay Area. So thank you for having me participate in this session. I'm a believer in the United States as a world leader. We've exercised world leadership going back to World War II. And that leadership has been largely based, obviously, on our values as a country, but also on our alliances. We have strengthened our alliances in order to deal with the challenges that we have faced in the world. And obviously, that leadership was called into question these last 4 years because of a president who basically said we should just focus on our country, not pay attention to the rest of the world, kind of an isolationist kind of approach to foreign policy. And in that process, he undermined our alliances and empowered our adversaries. And so I'm glad that President Biden has made clear that we're going to restore the role of the United States as a world leader and that we're back. And I think the meetings he had this last week kind of indicate that he's on that path. He went ahead and reaffirmed our alliances with Great Britain, with the G7, with NATO, with the European Union. And he made clear to Putin, I think, where some of the red lines are. I think the test, obviously, is going to depend on how he actually deals with some of these terrible challenges that are out there. We're dealing with a lot of flashpoints in the world of 2021. Obviously, China represents a real challenge to the United States. They've made clear they want to assume the role of world leader. Russia, in a second chapter, really, of the Cold War with Putin, we saw that play out last week. We have the situation with Iran, which remains a threat to regional security in the Middle East. North Korea, which remains a real threat to our security. Added to that are a number of failed states in the Middle East, undermining the stability of the Middle East itself. And also terrorism still remains a threat to the United States, as well as cyber warfare, which is now what I call the battlefield of the future. I think it's going to be incredibly important for this country to be able to build the kind of alliances we're going to need throughout the world in order to confront all of those different challenges, any one of which could obviously erupt into a potential conflict for the future. So it is a dangerous world, and it requires strong United States leadership.
That's our warm and fuzzy starting point. So when you were Secretary of Defense, I'm assuming, and I refer back to a comment that Colin Powell made to this group a couple of years ago when we were describing how horrific it seemed and everything was falling apart and all the dangers. And his response was, hey, we're the United States. We get through these things. He said, when I was growing up, we had riots, we had marches, we had killings, we had world issues, but we get through these things. So, but from the perspective of a one person, every country gets this, the Secretary of Defense. What does it feel like today versus when you were Secretary of Defense? What is it the same? Everything's an issue, or does it feel different today because of the factors you mentioned?
In some ways it feels the same, but I have to tell you, in other ways, it really feels different because there are so many challenges that I just described. And it really requires the United States to have a defense that is agile, that is flexible, and that really is on the cutting edge of technology. I mean, the reality is that in order to protect our national security these days, we really have to be on the cutting edge of technology when it comes to artificial intelligence, robotics, space, all of the other areas that are developing like crazy, particularly in China, as well as other countries. So I think the issue is going to be whether or not our defense system obviously remains the most powerful on the face of the earth. I think that's important to be able to have a strong national defense, to support our diplomacy and to support our role as a world leader. But for that defense system to be strong, it is going to have to adapt to the challenges of the 21st century. And we haven't quite got there yet. I think we need to develop the imagination, the innovation, the creativity in order to build a national security system that fits the 21st century. And we're not there yet.
So here is the cover for The Economist this week, or today, the broadband bandits. And it talks exactly about what you're talking about, the cyber threat from not only crooks, but spies. Do you think that our connection in the United States with our technology industry is what it should be? I sense sometimes that the cyber attacks are handled by the government agencies, but not necessarily including our skilled technology experts, and that there could be a better partnership? Or do you think it's kind of going the way you just expect it to go?
No, I'm worried about our approach to the cyber threat, and I've been worried about it for a long time, going back to when I was in the administration, dealing with cyber threats at that time. I think that we have not really had the ability to put together a strong national strategy to confront cyber terrorism. And everybody, it's a very hit and miss process right now. Everybody is siloed into their own area. It's true at the federal level. I mean, intelligence has some good defenses, and defense has some good defenses, but other departments, as we saw in the Solar Winds attack, are very vulnerable. And I think the same thing is true for the private sector. I mean, I think there are some in the private sector trying to do a pretty good job of providing security, but that isn't true across the board. And the biggest problem is that there is no partnership here in trying to deal with these threats. Everybody's trying to do their own thing. And the consequence is that we are not coming together, providing the kind of defense we need. Now, look, there are several important things that have to be done. First of all, we do need that national strategy. Two, we need a partnership between the public and private sector. We've got to be able to share information on these very sophisticated viruses that are being developed in order to be able to defend against those viruses. We need to develop both a strong defense and a strong offense. As Joe Biden pointed out, I think we've got to be willing to use our offensive capabilities when Russia or these gangs attack us. We've got to make clear that they have to pay a price. And the third thing is we have got to stay on the cutting edge of this technology. We've got to recruit smart people. We've got to develop the kind of technology that puts us in the lead, so we aren't always finding that we're just trying to catch up in dealing with these kinds of attacks. So there's a lot to be done in order to properly defend this country.
The concerns about some of the folks you've mentioned, China and Russia, China more particularly, if you look at the way they go about their daily business, it's a whole lot different than ours. They're a true, coming from the top, and there's no questions asked. That allows you to do some things positively, and it certainly has some negative impacts on your population. But if we're competing with that as a methodology for their advancing, and we've seen them grow their weapons and their military capacity, not to mention their cyber ability, how do you be an isolationist or a globalist and deal with them in today's world? It almost seems like an oxymoron.
Well, it really demands that the United States has to deal with our adversaries, whether it's Russia or China or anybody else, from a position of strength, not a position of weakness. And I think, unfortunately, our adversaries have read weakness on the part of the United States and tried to take advantage of it. I mean, China has moved into the vacuum that was established in the last few years, trying to assert its influence in the world. Russia basically took advantage of it, whether it was aggression in the Ukraine or Crimea or Syria or Libya or the United States in terms of our election institutions. So when it comes to China, I think it is very important for the president to make clear where the red lines are with regards to China. He indicated what those lines are with regards to Putin. I think he's got to do the same thing with regards to China. We have real concerns about their aggression in the South China Sea, their militarization of the islands in the South China Sea, their approach to Taiwan, what happened in Hong Kong, how they deal with the Uyghurs. I mean, there are a number of areas, in addition to trade, obviously, that raise serious concerns with the United States. We need to make clear where those lines are. And at the same time, we need to make clear that we're prepared to have a dialogue with the Chinese.
Yeah.
When it comes to trade, when it comes to the ability to have open seas, when it comes to the ability to understand the kind of technology and cyber threats that we're dealing with and confronting each other. I mean, there are areas where we can have that dialogue, but we have to do it from a position of strength, and the Chinese need to know it. Otherwise, they're not going to come to the table.
I think that's an excellent point. So if you take all of that world chaos that you described, or the issues at best, and you take the next drop down, it's the United States. We have to have, I won't say a singular voice, but we have to have a democracy that works. We have to have an image that works. How are you feeling from the time you left to today, lots of ups and downs, about our democracy?
I'm worried as hell, frankly, about our democracy. We've seen how fragile our democracy is.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly January 6th made that very clear when a mob attacked the United States Capitol and actually stopped our democracy from functioning. I never in my lifetime expected that I would see anything like that. And when you combine that polarization in the country, when you combine that with the dysfunction in Washington politically, I mean, I've said in my over 50 years of public life, I've seen Washington at its best and I've seen Washington at its worst. I mean, the reality is I've seen Washington work. I've seen it. I've seen Republicans and Democrats willing to work together. Of course, they had their political differences, but when it came to big issues, they worked together to try to solve the problems facing our country, because that's what governing is all about. That's why people are elected, for God's sakes. It's not to just survive in office. It is to lead and to find the solutions necessary for our country. In recent years, I've never seen Washington as dysfunctional as it is in terms of partisanship, division, the inability of both parties to work together. Politics is much more important than the interests of the country. And you can see it. You saw it with this vote on the failure to establish a commission to look at January 6th. Why? Because of the politics of not wanting to offend Trump. And what that says to the country and to the world is that the United States and our ability to deal with the problems facing our country is dysfunctional. And that, frankly, when you talk about national security, I think that's one of the greatest threats to national security, is the inability of our country and the leadership in our country to work together to deal with the challenges facing us domestically, but also facing us in the world. We need to get back to strong bipartisan leadership, both in Washington and, for that matter, in Sacramento.
Well, we'll come back to this theme a couple of more times, because it permeates our conversation at the Bay Area Council. It permeates the conversation today, not only to the world, of course, the United States and California and the region. So let's talk about sometimes things have to get so bad that that's the only time they get better. And you may have just described Washington in that vein, but let's talk about racial equity. and the opportunities that are now being presented. Obviously, the event with George Floyd was the bottom of the issue. It couldn't get any worse than that sense of pride in being an American. It went to the bottom. And now many corporations, many individuals, many groups, you've seen a couple of them today, have focused on how to create equity, how to create social justice in a broad swath. And obviously starting from that bottom is not easy, but how do you see that as what I would call possibly a piece of optimism that says we can address something that's gotten so bad, and maybe Washington follows, but what's your thoughts on the race and equity situation? We're starting to see the light at the end of the day, maybe.
Look, I as concerned as I am about what I see happening in Washington, I have to tell you that I'm a believer in American leadership. This country has come through a number of crises throughout our history, whether it was Civil War or world wars or recessions or depressions or natural disasters. Somehow, we've always found the leadership to rise to the occasion. And in some ways, I've seen that as Secretary of Defense in the eyes of our men and women in uniform that serve this country. I mean, I've looked into their eyes, and here are young people that are willing to fight and die in order to protect our country. And what we need, frankly, is a little bit of that same leadership and that courage in order to be willing to deal with some of these very tough issues that we are confronting. And look, inequality in our country is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. Why? Because it violates the promise that this country has made since our very beginning, which is that we are all created equal and we all should have an equal opportunity to succeed. I'm the son of Italian immigrants. And I used to ask my parents, why'd you come all of that distance to come to this country? They came from a poor area in Italy, but they also left their family and their friends. Why did you do that? My dad said, because your mother and I believed we could give our children a better life in this country. That is the American dream. That's the California dream of giving our children a better life. And so we need to make sure that everybody gets a shot at that opportunity. And yeah, it may require that we've got to reach out. We've got to be willing to give people the opportunity to succeed. And we're going to have to be true to who we are in understanding that everybody deserves a chance at success. Doesn't mean that you guarantee it. It's not going to be guaranteed. You're going to have to work for it. But damn it, you want to have the chance to succeed. And that's what we need to do with everybody in our society. And obviously those who have been at the largest disadvantage, going back throughout our history, we need to focus on that. We've made progress. There's no question about it. We've made progress, but you can't move forward if there are those who are promoting hate and anger and racism and ugliness in the American society. We have got to confront that as well, which is this deep polarization that I think is dividing our country. And somehow we've got to make clear to everybody, man, we either work at this together or we're going to lose it. It's that simple. And we saw what happened on January 6th.
There is an old expression about, if you don't pay attention to history, you're doomed to repeat it. And it will be fascinating this week to see the results in the New York mayoral election, because they're about to go back to a day when Rudy Giuliani was elected under the single purpose of law and order. Frank Jordan was elected here in San Francisco, and that was his theme as a former police chief. And they're now going through these negotiations and arguments over what's the right approach homelessness, crime, all the things that New York is suffering. It will be fascinating to see whether that comes out differently or than we might think, or whether the history lesson, is of use. As you know, we have Governor Newsom at the end of this panel, at the end of today. And for those who heard Meg Whitman, she was unshy about commenting on the issues we deal with. You actually were quoted in the San Francisco Business Times that the California dream may be in trouble. Could you tell us what you were thinking when you said that, and what you've thought about since?
Well, look, it's not a mystery that California has been through the year from hell.
Yep.
We've all endured a tremendous amount of crisis from COVID, from a recession, from growing inequality in our society, from climate impacts of wildfires, and now a huge drought, and from that polarization and partisanship that I talked about. And there's no question that California is, at least as I see it now, on the path towards recovery. And I think, part of that, I think the governor is responsible for, and trying to promote vaccinations in over 70% of our population. That's been critical. If we're going to ever develop any kind of herd immunity, we've got to do that, and also protect ourselves against these variants. And we've had a tremendous amount of fiscal relief in terms of federal money as well as state money that has helped businesses and helped employees through unemployment comp and stimulus checks, et cetera. And there's no question, I think there's a forecast that UCLA has that we're looking at strong growth for, over this year and hopefully the next 2 years. But I think that it is important to understand that if we're really going to have California as a strong competitive economy for the 21st century, then we're going to have to deal, just as I mentioned, those flashpoints abroad, we're going to have to deal with the flashpoints here in this state. And there are some serious issues related to climate and housing and inequality, immigration, education, tax policy. We're going to have to deal with that. And we're going to have to, frankly, deal with some of the dysfunction that I talked about in Washington that's also true in Sacramento. This state was at its best when we had two strong political parties that were made up of, yes, liberals, as well as moderates, as well as conservatives. But the most important thing is that we had leadership that was willing to work together. We had the Ken Maddys and the Waldys and the Morettis, and we had, the person I worked for in Washington, Tom Kuechel, came out of that heritage on the Republican Party. You've got to be able to work together to be able to confront these issues. If it's all about politics, we'll never succeed. So it is really important that we are going to have to look at some basic reforms in California. We're going to have to look at tax reform. We're going to have to look at education reform. And we're also going to have to look at regulatory reform so that we can really establish a California that can be competitive in the 21st century. And I hope that the governor is able to focus on those issues. This isn't just about, hopefully coming out of this recovery. It's also about what kind of future is California going to have if we're going to provide the California dream to everybody.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that, of course. I think one of the thoughts we had last year when we were talking about some of these issues was what got us here. Why is it so partisan? Why does it seem more extreme than it used to be? And I put out a question that said, if you think about it, the Arab Spring, which created Twitter and the ability to rally 1 million people with a tweet, and the creation of the two cable networks that do nothing but silo their listeners. So you're either on the far right or the far left, and that's all you listen to 24/7. That's here, and both of those are here. And think about being a politician today. Imagine if everything you said was tweeted out, the next day, and you say, whoops, I didn't mean that. Whoops, I didn't mean to say that. It's got to be so much harder to be a politician today in that environment where everything you say is recorded, everything you say is echoed around the planet. And yet you're correct. The way to do deals, if you're in real estate or business or in politics, is to get in a room, close the door, and get something accomplished. That doesn't seem to be feasible. Do you think we can get back to that? Or do you think the die is cast that that's where we are and that's how stuff's communicated?
Well, I sure as hell hope not, because I think that is at the heart and soul of our ability to govern ourselves. And our democracy is not going to succeed unless we get back to that. One of the things I teach the students here at the Panetta Institute is that in a democracy, we govern either by leadership or by crisis. If leadership is there and willing to take the risks associated with leadership, and mark my word, you are not a leader unless you're willing to take risks. If all you're going to do as a leader is try to do the safe things that won't get you in any trouble, political trouble, then you're not going to be a leader. It's true in the business sector. I mean, if you want to be a successful business, you're going to have to take risks. And if you do, your business will succeed. And if you don't, I mean, if we don't have that kind of leadership, then make no mistake about it, we'll govern by crisis, which means that crisis will dominate what's happening in terms of our state as well as our country. And you can do that. I mean, if you're a political leader, you can just say, I'm not going to raise taxes. I'm not going to cut spending. I'm not going to do anything that's tough. I'll just wait for crisis. And when crisis happens, then you say, well, you try to say, I'll blame crisis. And usually what happens is you do a Band-Aid approach rather than actually fixing the problem. You can do that. And we've done too much of that in this country. And there's a price to be paid, which is you lose the trust of the American people in our system of governing. And that's what happened at the national level. That's why Trump, frankly, got elected. And it can happen here in California as well. If you lose the trust of the California people in terms of, who's leading our state and who's providing leadership and whether or not they're allowing crisis to dominate our lives. And if crisis is dominating our lives, then all of us will turn to each other and say, what the hell is going on? Why can't we deal with these challenges? Look, the bottom line is leaders are going to have to make some tough decisions. They're going to have to make decisions that may not please their party base in order to be able to develop some of these solutions. I remember when we were working on budget deficits. Today, neither the Republicans or Democrats are very interested in budget discipline. And so, we're dealing with the largest national debt in our history and a deficit that is the largest in our history as well. But in my day, we were worried about deficits, but we sat down, Democrats and Republicans sat down and negotiated a budget agreement. This was during the Bush administration. We spent 2 weeks out at Andrews Air Force Base negotiating a package of tax increases and a package of entitlement cuts, $500 billion. And was it easy? No, it was tough. But by virtue of putting that agreement together and passing it, and Bill Clinton did the same thing in his budget, another $500 billion in deficit reduction, we balanced the federal budget and developed a surplus. Were there people who lost their seats because of those votes? Yes. Yeah, you bet. There's some people, if they're going to vote for tax increases, they may lose their seat. If they're going to vote for gun control, you may lose your seat. But damn it, that is what leadership is all about. It's putting the country ahead of politics. And that's what needs to be restored, both at the state level and the federal level, in order for our democracy to have half a chance of succeeding.
That's a hard note to improve upon. I think you said it interestingly, in a couple of your comments, one about when the state was working well or the federal government was working well, there was a balance. And as we know today, California has got a supermajority of the Democratic Party, which is good news in that they can do, in theory, what they want. But the bad news is they have no one to blame. So here we are with the housing crisis, as bad as it's ever been. Can't get housing bills passed in meaningful ways. We have been able, through a couple of processes. I had the opportunity to co-chair this thing called CASA, which was an opportunity to say, look, let's put everybody in the room who blames everybody else. Let's give them the assignment to come up with legislation that can get passed. And let's see if we can come up with something in a public forum through the MTC. And we did it. We came up with a 10-element compact. People gave that didn't want to give. People had to get out of their silos. And it seems to me that your Public Policy Institute, which is we're going to get to in a minute, has the opportunity to maybe forge something like that. Now, maybe if you could give us just a general overview about it. It is what I would call the long-term solution, which is get younger people engaged, get them to where they are, understand what you just gave as a guideline, a North Star. But on the other hand, we have today's issues, but we got what we got. So let's talk about the Institute and how you came up with it and what your goals are and what we can do to help.
Well, when Sylvia and I came back from Washington, when I had been chief of staff to the president, came back to this area. And I helped establish a campus of the CSU system here in Monterey, where I'm located right now, at what was formerly Fort Ord, military reservation, which got closed when I was a congressman, which wasn't easy for this community. It was 25% of our economy was dependent on the military at that time. But we came together to establish a campus of the CSU system, and that's CSU Monterey Bay now, which is actually has almost close to 8,000 students. When I came back and started working with students, both at Santa Clara, my old alma mater, as well as CSU, I was really concerned that students were not interested in public service. Look, my parents were immigrants. They said I owed something back to the country. 2 years in the Army taught me about what duty to country is all about. And there was a young president who said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So those are the things that motivated me to get involved in public service. And I didn't see that in young people. And my wife and I were worried about that. So we established our Institute for Public Policy, aimed at trying to inspire people to lives of public service. So how do we do that? We try to develop curriculum that would try to inspire them to get involved. Look, when I went, my first job in Washington was a legislative assistant to Tom Kuechel. But what it did is it opened up my eyes to what public service is all about and what the issues were in Washington. So we do a congressional internship program, but we bring students here. We train them for two weeks on issues in Washington. They go back and serve in the California delegation, both Republicans and Democrats, for 3.5 months. We pay for everything so that cost is not a problem, and every young person has a chance to be able to do that. We just completed a leadership course for student body officers, because I figure if you're a student body officer, there must be a little public service in your head. So we try to teach them what are the challenges of leadership that everybody has to confront, whether you're in business, whether you're in the military, whether you're in politics, whether you're in your community, to try to pass that on. We try to, I do a course for law students from Santa Clara to try to resurrect the art of governing, where I bring law students here and I say, I say, look at an issue, give me the Republican position and give me the Democratic position, and then give me what it would take to have a consensus or a compromise position.
Oh my God.
That's what governing is all
Heresy.
about, by the
Heresy.
way. So, I'm trying to get these law students who probably need that approach, even if you're trying to be a good lawyer, to try to work together on the art of what it takes to govern. And there are other curricula as well. Our hope is that these young people take these lessons and then get involved. And they are. I mean, we've done this now for over 20 years. We have students who are now in city councils, who are in Congress, who are at the state level in various capacities. We're trying to plant that new generation of leaders for the future. But I'll tell you, it's not easy. And I mentioned this in our conversation the other day, and I'll repeat it. Young people are not getting the kind of civic education that they need on how our democracy functions. They're not learning the basics. And we have to spend a lot of time on the basics. This is how our democracy is supposed to work. This is how you make a law. This is what regular order is all about. I mean, there are members of Congress that don't know what regular order is all about. And so we're trying to place them in a position where they understand that democracy only works if they're part of it and if they're part of the process. And that the greatest reward, very frankly, from public service is the ability to improve the lives of others. That's the basic reward of public service. So, we're hoping to do it. And we see, a lot of the fruits of what we're doing. Look, I wish this was going to change from the top down, but I'm not so confident that it's going to change from the top down. I think it's going to have to change from the bottom up with new generations of leaders who understand that it's much more important to govern our country than to simply play politics.
That's well said, and it may be prophetic. Just to highlight, this is the sheet that talks about new leadership in a new decade, and can America be healed? And I think we've tried to cover that from a world, national, and local perspective. I will say that, as everybody knows, Jim Wonderman, who leads this fine organization, is trying to come up with a way to do exactly what you're talking about, come up with a long-term strategy for getting California, what I'll say, back to the middle. The moderate in California is unrepresented essentially today. And your institute can be clearly the acorn for that tree. And I'm going to ask you today, unannounced yesterday, that I want you to try to get involved with this with Jim and the group. It's called the Coalition for California. And it is an attempt to say, look, if we just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, we'll have no housing. We won't have cured homelessness. All the equity issues won't have been solved. We'll just have more politics. So I'm going to ask you in public to help us play a role in this, making California a better place for all. And your institute, you're 20 years ahead of the curve. And so, not surprising that your background, your intelligence, and your passion, among all, are what's needed. And I tried to talk you into coming back into politics yesterday, but even though you're 82, I think you've got a good 10 years of fire in your belly. So we may try to get you engaged more than you think. But I just want to say thank you more than I can say for spending this time with us. You are an inspiration. You have a history of being a public servant at the highest level by multiple leaders of the world, and you are someone to be guiding the future for the rest of us. It's something we'd love for you to do. So Mr. Panetta, Secretary Panetta, every other Panetta name, Leon Panetta, thank you so much for doing this, and I'm sure everybody has been mostly inspired, if not entertained, by the conversation. And you swore more than I did, so that's a record. So thank you again.
Michael, thank you very much. Again, my thanks to the Bay Area Council. And of course, I'll be happy to try to help in any way I can to try to see if we can plant anew how you're supposed to govern in order to try to solve these problems. I think it's a concern that if we just allow these crises to go on and on and on, and
Yep.
hope that somehow, we can somehow keep people alive by just, giving them something to just make it from day to day, we will never be able to fulfill that California promise of a better life.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. And we appreciate your time and all that you do for the country.
Thank you. Appreciate
Take care.
it.
All right.
Good luck.
Thanks. Bye-bye.